I talked to people who are in the home restoration industry, and a couple of questions that they have learned to get good answers is what percentage of people who are franchised have failed? What percentage don't work out?
All right, welcome back, Tribe, as we break down another topic, passive income strategy or not. So today we're looking at franchising. Is it a passive income or is it a full-time job? I'm going to be joined today by Downtown Ernie Brown, my partner, Mr. Joey Murray, and bringing back a guy to the show, Mr. Chad Arnold. Good to see you again, Chad.
Good to be here, Russ.
All right, gentlemen, we have the job of trying to determine, is this a strategy that we should be considering? If so, what are the components that we need to think about? How would someone set this up in a way that potentially, if it can be passive, and then maybe give some more feedback. I know that, Chad, you're the only one on here that has actually done franchising. So I want to make sure that I start with you and I probably end with you. I'm going to ask you the most questions since you have the most insights around this subject. So first, what attracted you to franchising as an investment strategy, and why did you choose it maybe over starting a business?
Sure, yeah. This might be disappointing answer here. I wish I could say that I was looking for franchises and I Googled all these different ones and found the top ones and went after it, but that was not at all the case. I was in commercial real estate and we had a space for lease, and I contacted this company to put a corporate store there, and they asked us to be the franchisees because they didn't have one for Oklahoma, and it was very informal, and turns out we were their first franchisee. I did not want to do it, but I got home, my wife did, and so now we're doing it, and that's usually how it works. So I was not seeking a franchise.
If you've listened to our show for any length of time, you've heard us talk about infinite banking and how we were able to use that concept to create over $50,000 a month in passive income. But it's just not that easy to figure out, how does this all connect into my own personal system?
Stallion, that's why we created the passive income operating system, bro. It shows you how to turn active income into passive income. It makes all the steps come together. If you would like to get access to it as a podcast listener, we've never given this away in public before. Go to what'swhatwallstreet.com/PIOS.
I've been doing some research around here. 69% of all franchisees are male, average age 44. Now, just so you know, Tribe, why are we having this conversation? Because almost $1 trillion in revenue are being done this year by franchises. So this is a big idea. So we need to understand, does this fit in our buy box? And so, Chad, how many stores do you guys have currently?
We have 5 stores currently.
And you're scaling up to what by the end of the year?
We'll open one in May, one in June, and one in November. So 8 by the end of the year.
Okay, cool. So this is why, as you can understand, why we brought Chad in. He clearly is a proponent of it. Joey, Ernie, and I have been talking to our friends, our clients, people who've done it, and I think we've gotten some opinions from them, both positive and negative, that we'll try to do our best to share based upon that. All right, so Joey, Ernie, since you haven't done it, have you ever considered it? And if so, why?
Yeah, so I'll lead us off here, Russ, and I'll say, no, I haven't really considered it. And the reason would be is probably, I'll just say, I need to be on this episode today to learn. I need to type into Chad GPT and find out all there is about franchising, because my limited experience and knowledge has come from 10 to 15 friends who I know who have done this. And honestly, it's about a 50-50. You either hear, man, things are going well, or this was a travesty. Things weren't as they said they were. I feel scammed by whatever I got into. And so to me, it was just one of those things where it's like, it's uneasy. It's unsettling to have such disparity in these different models.
What about for you, Ern?
Yeah, I definitely have, just driving around town, looking at all these stores and wondering, well, what is a franchise and what's not? I've been interested in business, think about food, think about services, think about products. Like how can I get involved in that world? well, what are the franchises that are out there if I'm interested in this and providing this need on whatever, whatever's on my mind at the time. So I have looked at franchises and just tried to look up, well, what are they? What are the opportunities that are out there? And then have considered, well, if I did this, what are the time requirements to do this? And then just understanding, like Joey, having some friends who are in this, I know that there's a different capital outlay for each one. There's a huge difference in them. And so I've done some investigation as to what can be done. What would it look like for me to do this? How much would it cost?
What about you, Russ? Have you considered
I consider everything, bro.
it? That was a dad question. Sorry.
Everything is an option for me. So let me kind of give some feedback here. Like one, I'm just a need to experience it, touch it, see it to try to understand whether or not I would like it or not. So, from an experience standpoint, I have been in a franchise model where my child was doing this thing called Kid Strong. It's kind of like basically kids CrossFit. And I observed the simplicity of the model, but the gamification that happened. And I was like, and I realized it was a franchise. And I thought, this is the kind of thing I would love to do because it required like three in my opinion, probably low wage people. The space wasn't overly decked out, so I could tell that it wasn't a whole lot of money put in to make it happen. Coming from a wife who started a dental practice and had to spend, $700 and something thousand dollars just to get it to where she could even operate in it. I'm like, these guys probably spent $100,000 tops, and that would like be with all equipment and everything. It's probably a fraction of that. So I was like, oh, this is a good experience. And then everybody that was in there loved it, and they were constantly referring people, including me, to it. I was like, this is the kind of model I'd be in. See it, I watched Chad, and I've said, man, that dude is killing it. So yeah, that would be an option I'd be into. But the part that maybe has not appealed to me as much is, it's usually, I'm not a paint by numbers kind of guy. Like, I'm more of a draw outside the lines typically. And I would definitely want to know kind of where those boundaries are. Where can I push past? Like where can I take my ideas and they go, no, that doesn't apply, that you're going to get outside the corporate structure. You need to have these specific items in the inside the place. I would be kind of like the guy in the movie The Founder, Chad, where he shows up and they're selling, chicken wings and other thing at the McDonald's. Like I'd be trying new things. So
Yeah, the idea guy in the franchise world don't really mesh very well.
I think there'd be some issues potentially with that. So one of the questions I asked, some of my friends as I was going through this, I said, what would you advise a potential franchisee to ask prior to committing? And so I kind of want to know that from you, Chad, like prior to committing to go into this world. I know that you didn't maybe do it the way everyone else has potentially, but what would be one of those questions or some questions that you would ask somebody, a potential franchisor as a franchisee?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of obviously the first way we did it was very unorthodox and we didn't know what we were doing. We didn't know what to ask. But after we opened our first few locations, we thought we were franchise experts. So we decided to go to a different company, still in the food and beverage space. And we learned, in fact, we paid them $40,000 franchise fee, got in there, quickly realized, all right, this is not a viable model for us. We're actually going to lose money, and tried to get out of the deal. And, they threatened us like, hey, you signed a franchise agreement with us. We forecast your store is going to do this amount. You owe us this amount of royalties and we hadn't had $1 in sales. So I quickly learned then we should have talked to more franchisees, because the franchisor, they're going to say whatever they need to say typically. This isn't for everyone, but they're going to say whatever they need to say to get you to sign and to pay the franchise fee. So they have a list of franchisees that you can call and you can just ask them like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. Should I do it? They're going to be open with you. If they're not if they're having a bad experience, I would think that they would tell you. So instead of getting more info from the franchisor, I would get it from active franchisees with that franchisor.
Yeah, and I will say you said 40,000 as the startup fee, and kind of doing some research. The higher the franchise fee, the higher the royalty, the lower the default rate, the lower the failure rate is what the statistics are showing. So, and they put that benchmark at 25,000. So, anything underneath that is probably one with a low barrier entry, which means maybe there's not going to be a lot of support, maybe not a lot of structure,
Yep.
and you're kind of right above that area. So Joey, in your opinion, as someone maybe looking into buying a franchise today, what would be the biggest concerns or hesitations you would have?
I don't know if it's completely related to what Chad just said, but being clear on what all falls on me as a franchise owner versus the company who's supporting that franchise. If it's all like hands on, that to me is out. If I have to, like, even understanding how much do I have to be involved? Is there certain requirements on my time or anything like that? I would think the other part about it is kind of what you said too, Russ, is the lack of creativity. Like being able to go into a model, you're actually buying the fact that you don't have to think about it. It's already done for you to a certain degree, is what is my perception. But I like to actually be a part of making changes or in impacting the results in some way. And so I don't know that that really fits the franchise model. Following a script is just not something I like to do in general. So those are kind of my main barriers that I would have to get through in order to see if it would be a fit.
I would tell you, as I were asking questions around that, Joey, one of the common things that I heard back from some of these franchisees in the different spaces they were in was to ask about what is your cost? What are the things that are on you that you're going to be responsible for? And marketing actually, I would have thought was like one of the things that they did for you. But I think it's the bigger the franchise, the national footprint, that's more common as compared to in some of these smaller franchise, more, I would say focused on you're going to be responsible for some of that marketing cost. You're going to pay some of that ad cost. So like really understanding what are those costs? Because one of the comments I got from one of my friends that was in a food and beverage deal, he said, when he looked at the initial kind of performance for the business, they tripped him up by only showing gross profit. And they didn't show what came after that. Didn't go into the labor costs, didn't go into some of the other kind of taxes and other insurances and other things that he was not even considering because he hadn't been a business owner in that space before. And so asking some of those questions, like what are you going to be responsible for? To your point, some of those things you may want to be responsible for because you like marketing and that's something that you're good at. But also if you're going to have to be responsible for, what is a typical expense? Can I talk to other franchisees that are doing this that would help me avoid that? Ernie, as you're sitting here listening to us, I don't know how you're leaning here. How does this franchise model kind of fit with your investor DNA?
Thanks for asking how I lean, Russ. Typically, straight up and down, slightly forward is how I go. Um, not to the left or to the right. You know what I mean? Yeah, but on the previous conversation, I just want to comment on that because I think Chad's experience is really good, both with inventing a new model with a company and then having a bad experience. The thing that comes to mind is when you're working with a franchisee, how many business models are they going to show you that shows failure or loss of income? I mean, never. They're always going to show you profitable models. And so the better questions you can ask of the franchisee, the better. And so I talked to two people who are in the home restoration industry, and a couple of questions that they have learned to get good answers is, hey, what percentage of people who are franchised have failed? What percentage don't work out? Because that exists. You'd like to know what that looks like. And then in terms of understanding how they're collecting royalties and why, sort of want them to get to justify to you why it's worth you paying royalties to them so that they can demonstrate their service to you. And so a question that this person that I was talking to said they have learned to ask is to frame that value, to get the understanding of the value, is ask the question, well, why would I pay you royalties to be able to operate this business as opposed to just starting my own?
Hmm.
And that forces a justification of showing value, which I think is pretty good. And so those are questions to ask to a corporate. But then I also got some insight. And they told me, well, don't look just to talk with them, because their job is to paint you the picture in the rosiest of colors, is to speak to other franchisees and or people who are running their own franchises, the people who own, so that you can get a sense of, well, what is good and what is bad. And there's some certain questions that you could ask them as well. But I thought that was really valuable to gain experience. It comes down to, I kind of know what I need to know, but how do I ask the questions to make sure that I actually get that information? Now, for me in my lean, when I think about franchises, the thing that is appealing to me in terms of my personality and my profile and in my investor DNA is that I'm a precisionist. I like the idea of opening a business, a service, a product where I have a roadmap towards success, that I don't have to make it up. I don't necessarily have to invent the marketing plan. I get to see a marketing plan in another market that has worked. And I can see that this is what my labor expense ought to be, and my spend for product or service or good, whatever it is. I kind of get a sense of this is where you should be. And I like that. Somebody's giving me the system. I don't have to make it up. But the downside, the thing that hangs over my head and why I haven't done this, is two things. Number one, I worry that this is going to be, this isn't going to be something that I do. This is going to be the thing that I do. And that now I am 100% committed to this business for the indefinite future, because it just continues to require my time. And the other thing is, I'm going into a partnership inside a franchise, and I care about how I exit from anything. And I'm a little bit dependent upon this partner, in that they're going to keep building their brand. They're going to maintain goodwill around the brand, and they're not going to force changes down on me that's going to cause me to have to exit or want to exit early. And being dependent upon that, while it is blessing to have an established brand to start, I worry on the back end the impacts of my exit.
There was nothing worse than walking into class when you're in school and the teacher saying, "Pop quiz day." Why? Because you were unprepared. Are you unprepared, though, for financial freedom?
Don't be. Find out how close you are by taking our 30-second quiz at wealthwithoutwallstreet.com/quiz.
Hey, as a fan of our podcast, chances are you're always looking for other great resources to grow your wealth and build financial freedom.
And if you've ever been curious about self-storage investing, there's only one guy you need to listen to, our good friend, Scott Myers.
Yeah, Scott is the OG of self-storage. He's been in the game for years, and his podcast, Self-Storage Investing, is packed with insights, strategies, and real-world success stories.
Whether you're just getting started or you're looking to scale, Scott's podcast will help you understand why self-storage is one of the most recession-resistant cash-flowing assets out there.
Yeah, go check out Self-Storage Investing with Scott Myers. Wherever you listen to podcasts, trust us, you'll be hooked.
Chad, we labeled this podcast passive income or full-time job, right? So in your opinion, what are the key steps to setting up a franchise to where you're not necessarily involved in the daily grind?
Yeah, I don't know that if you open one location, it's not going to be like that. And so it's a slow grind. When we first opened one, my wife was working all the time. I remember I was going to get milk because we're running out of milk, or 8:00 on Saturday, the plumbing pipe burst. They'd call my cell phone. I'm going there. Right.
Right.
So I don't think it's realistic to have the expectation of this is going to be truly passive with one location. because with scale, you're able to hire a handyman or other people to go get the milk, that kind of thing. And so I do believe it can be passive, but it ultimately depends on the success of the first location. Because if you open one location and it doesn't go well, well, then you're probably not going to get another one open. The franchise or is not going to award it, or your lender is not going to loan you on it. So
Mm.
you really got to do good out of the gate and then just keep expanding. And that's how it can become passive.
No, I love that. So Joey, based upon kind of what you've heard Chad say so far, what questions come to mind maybe that a first time franchise investor should be asking?
Based on what Chad's saying, and as well as some of the people that I've met that have had franchises, one of my main questions to the company that owns these franchises would be how much do they get involved in the hiring process? Like for your team of people at your location, is there any guideline? Is there any restriction? Is there any, like what are the rules around that? Because here's the key feedback I got from everybody is to the extent that you know your team, to the extent that you have got the right people in the right seats, is the only way that these become passive. And it's not that hard to make that leap because any business is all about the team. It's all about making sure people in the right seats. So if the franchisor had any sort of, oversight or requirements on you, that would be a game that would be a no on the board for me because I would want to have strict accountability to myself that I was putting the right people in the right seats.
Yeah, one of the questions I asked to all of these franchisees out there, how long should someone expect to work in the business before it becomes profitable? And I think that would be a question that I would want to ask the franchisor, right? Like, tell me, how long is it before I'm going to actually take a draw? And people don't realize that business owners, they, I mean, the average business owner may work in a business for 3 to 5 years before they ever pay themselves anything.
Yeah.
My wife is as a dentist, worked for 2 years, zero pay, zero income. And I don't think not everyone expects that, right? So when I was asking that question, I got various answers. I got, as early as I was able to start taking a draw in 10 months. And I got some answers that it took almost 3 years before I got paid. So I think whenever you think about going into the business, how much am I going to make out of this? And you also have to do a cost analysis compared to what? Like if I'm going to, how much is the max I can make off one store? To your point, Chad, can I open other stores? And then can I do the math on what that looks like and compare it to what you can make doing what you're doing with no risk? Yeah, I mean, there's risk in everything, right? There's people right now being laid off all over the country, and there's postal workers thought they couldn't get laid off for anything, and they're facing, Doge right now. So, I mean, there's risk in all things, but the not having the responsibility of showing up when the pipe burst and not having to be the one necessarily to go run and go get milk unless somebody's paying you to do it. Those are things. Ernie, what other items do you think a first-time franchisee should be asking that we haven't already touched on?
Yeah, well, if it's okay, I'll ask Chad because I have these questions. I think he's probably got the answers. And actually, I want to go back to the profitability question because just knowing Chad, I think he's got some interesting perspective there. But I'll put it this way, Chad, when you thought about profitability with the first store, what was your expectation? And now as you've opened your fifth, has that expectation changed?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know what to expect with my first store. I think we were just opening it, thinking at the time, like, oh, my wife can work here because we just had our second child and she was ready to start working again. And so it was like, this will be a place for her. She worked at a cupcake place in college. Like, we weren't planning on opening all these stores. We were planning on opening one. And fortunately, call it luck, call it what I would call it was God's provision. We were profitable day one. And we weren't planning on that or anticipating that. Now we know when we open a store, it usually takes about 18 months to ramp up. That doesn't mean it takes 18 months to be profitable, but it takes 18 months for our sales to get to where we expect them to be. For whatever reason, that's like the ideal timeline on profitability. So
That's good. When you were working through the franchise model with this company and helping, probably a lot of ways helping them create it, and as you have investigated another franchise to go into, and I'm sure just in this world, lots of people now who run their own franchises. What's your experience and expectation upon being able to open up another store? Obviously, you've done it, but do you have any concern about being limited or any gatekeeping that exists with you or with any other franchises that you know of?
Yeah, there's certainly gatekeeping with other franchises. Like, and that's what one thing Krista said in the chat is how saturated is the market, and how many franchises do they own? One thing we love about the franchise we're with, they want to work with the least amount of families as possible.
Hmm.
And so my wife and I like that because what if you, Ernie, opened a store 30 minutes from my store, but no offense to you, you're not as good of an operator. Well, now when Russ goes to your store, he all of a sudden thinks all these stores are no good, and it hurts us. And so are they selling these franchises like hotcakes to everybody and anybody that has a heartbeat? That's not a good sign. And so that's one thing I would look at. For us personally, we have a great relationship with the family, and so expansion is not an issue for us, thankfully. But there are they will scrutinize other franchisors will scrutinize their franchisees, make sure they don't get out over their skis, and they'll give you like a region that you can play in. So
Yeah, that's good. Which makes me think one of the things that I would want, and you have done this, is that over time I would remove myself from the day-to-day grind. And
yeah,
if you are a franchisor, one of your concerns would be quality control. And as somebody who owns stores, you're worried about the quality of other people's stuff. So how are they representing your product that you're offering in your store? And so I wonder, are there any agreements that either in your model or other franchises that you've seen where you are required to be active in the store? Are there any agreements that exist? And then as somebody who would want to be passive, eventually, is that a hindrance? Have you seen that?
yeah, for sure. I mean, some franchisors require the franchisee to be in the store so many hours, or we don't have those requirements. But when we tell them, hey, we're going to open 3 stores this year, they say, hey, well, how are you going to do that while maintaining quality? And that's when we say, oh, well, we have a COO, we have a handyman, we have secret shoppers that we hire. The corporate does as well, but we hire them because we want quality to be so good. And so when they hear that, they know that we're already performing the checks and balances on our side. So they can extend the trust to us. So when after we open these 8 and we prove to them like, hey, they're running, all 8 are running the same. Okay, then here's a couple more. Like that's how that relationship works. It's mine is so informal. My franchise, thankfully, that we've built such a great relationship with them. But a lot of franchisors do have it all papered up. It's very corporate-y, where we don't experience that.
Do you have to pay a new kind of startup fee for each one you start, or because you have those, you're just continuing to pay royalties as the store gets going?
You pay a startup fee
Yeah.
and then you pay royalties. And that's all, honestly, that's the funny thing about franchising is, you open your first one, you write the check, you're good. Now, by the time someone opens their 100th store, they could make the argument, I know how to run these things better than you guys do. But you have to remember, they're the ones that created the model. Like
Right.
you're writing the check for that original set of data. And one thing to your point, Russ, about marketing, you have royalties, but then all of them have marketing fees, which are the extra percentages. And some of them charge them, some of them don't, but they all say we can charge them at a later date. So, it's usually 1 or 2% on top of the royalty for marketing fees. So,
One of the, as we get ready to move to the next section, but one of the great questions that one of these franchisees I asked said would be good for a first time person would be to ask the franchisor, if I were to poll all of your franchisees, how would they describe, what would they say is the best thing about what you guys do? And then what would they say is the thing that you guys need to improve on the most? Because I think that was, and I was like, that's really interesting, right? Like, because now they're forcing them. It's like if you ask yourself, what would your spouse say about you is great. What would your spouse say you need to improve on the most? Like it forces them to dig deep and to come up with those answers. And then obviously you can validate those if you ever do go speak to, one of their franchisees. I thought that was pretty cool. All right, Chad, kind of going back to the passive side. So, yeah, obviously you have 5, you're moving toward 8. What's the one thing that's made the difference in making this truly passive or semi-passive? I know truly passive may not exist. You've shared some of it, but what else would you add?
My wife is a workhorse. I mean, it's passive for me, right? No, she's a machine, but she does a really good job about delegating, and I think if you can learn to delegate and not control everything, that's how you can scale. Like, perfect example, my wife, about 2 months ago, I told her, I was like, hey, you really need to hire an assistant. You really need to hire an assistant. And she's like, well, what is she going to do for me? She hires her. First weekend, she's like, I don't think this is worth it. I don't have anything for her to do. Now this girl's running all over town for her. My wife told me today, she's helped me so much. So I think it's allowing yourself to delegate to a handyman, to trusting your people that you hired, like Joey said, and just giving it time, really realizing there's going to be some road bumps, but delegate and give it time.
Yeah, I think it's hard to become a business owner. And for first timers, there's a lot to be learned in that process. So Joey, after hearing all of this, do you see franchising as something that fits within your strategy now?
I could be convinced, but I think I honestly am more driven by the idea of buying an existing business that is not a franchise necessarily, where I can look at actual books at the actual location and the actual team that's in place and that sort of thing. Than the way in which we've talked about the franchise model is you're buying the actual model, not the actual business in that location. So you're leaving a lot of variables on the table. This is just me personally, as we've been talking about it. I would feel better about buying something that's already been in operation.
Okay. Well, Chad, thank you for sharing true wisdom. Our job was to ask good questions. I don't know if we did any of that. Ernie asked you a bunch of really good ones, but for the last thing I would ask is just thinking back, right? If you could do anything differently, after now, having opened 5, you could go back to that first store. What would you change, if anything?
Yeah, it's probably, I would say I would reinvest in my business more than we got off to just such a hot start that we weren't expecting. And I think just being more disciplined. It's easy to start having all this money and then you want to go buy stuff and buy cars and buy houses. And if I would have poured back into the business more, we might have been able to grow at a better pace. And I mean, we've gone at a great pace, but it would have been more calculated, and I don't know. So yeah, I think just more discipline financially from a personal level.
I love that. Well, thank you for coming back, Ern.
Yeah.
Thank you for all your insights, Stallion. And for you, Tribe, if this piqued your interest, here's the deal. Knowledge alone won't make you money. The key is action. So whether it's diving deeper into this, reaching out to more franchisors or franchisees like Chad and trying to figure out, does this fit your investor DNA? Just do something today that moves you closer to financial freedom. As always, have an amazing day.
This has been the Wealth Without Wall Street podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to the show to break free of the Wall Street mindset and begin building wealth on your own terms in places you understand so that your wealth will never run dry. See you next episode.